This video is an educational documentary based on publicly available records, court documents, and official reports. Hi friends, my name is Jake, and today I'm going to take you through 10 chilling and mysterious criminal cases that shook the United Kingdom. Case 1. Jeremy Neville Bamber. Jeremy Bamber was born on January 13, 1961, and adopted as an infant by Neville and June Bamber, a well-off farming couple living in Essex, England. Raised in a strict religious household, Jeremy and his adopted sister Sheila grew up with material comfort but emotional distance. While their parents valued discipline and faith, both children reportedly struggled under those expectations. As an adult, Jeremy showed little interest in farm life and dreamed instead of a glamorous lifestyle far removed from rural routines. By the mid-1980s, the Bamber family situation had grown increasingly complicated. Sheila, who had once pursued modeling in London, was dealing with serious mental health challenges and had been hospitalized on more than one occasion. After separating from her husband, she moved back into the family farmhouse with her 6-year-old twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel. Jeremy, meanwhile, lived nearby with his girlfriend in a cottage owned by his parents and was financially dependent on them, a situation that caused ongoing resentment. In the early morning hours of August 7, 1985, police were dispatched to White House Farm following a disturbing phone call. Officers arriving at the scene discovered 5 family members had lost their lives: Neville and June Bamber, their daughter Sheila, and her 2 young sons. A rifle was found near Sheila, along with a religious book, leading investigators to initially believe they were dealing with a tragic family incident followed by self-harm. Given Sheila's documented mental health history, this explanation appeared at first to make sense. Jeremy Bamber, who had contacted authorities claiming his father warned him about Sheila's behavior, appeared deeply shaken at the scene. Police initially accepted his account and treated him as a witness rather than a suspect. In a decision that would later draw heavy criticism, the farmhouse was cleaned and potential evidence was destroyed before a full forensic review could be completed. Media outlets quickly reported the incident as a case of family violence linked to mental illness, and for several weeks no charges were filed. However, as time passed, investigators began to question inconsistencies in Jeremy's behavior and statements. Witnesses noted that his demeanor appeared unusually calm, and some found his actions following the tragedy troubling. Suspicion increased when his girlfriend reported that he had made alarming comments prior to the deaths, suggesting hostility toward his parents and discussing extreme solutions. These statements, while not direct proof, caused police to re-examine the original conclusion. One of the most significant developments involved the rifle used in the incident. Investigators discovered a sound-reducing attachment stored separately, raising questions about whether Sheila could have physically used the weapon in the way initially described. Experts testified that if the attachment had been in place, it would have been extremely difficult for her to operate the rifle as suggested. Additionally, forensic traces linked to Sheila were found inside the attachment, implying it had been removed after she was already incapacitated. This detail shifted the entire direction of the investigation. On September 29, 1985, Jeremy Bamber was formally arrested and later charged in connection with the deaths. His trial began in October 1986 at Chelmsford Crown Court and quickly became a national spectacle. The prosecution argued that financial motives played a key role, pointing to the substantial inheritance Jeremy stood to receive. They claimed he staged the scene to redirect blame and exploited assumptions about his sister's mental health. The defense, on the other hand, maintained that Sheila was responsible and emphasized her psychiatric history. They argued that the investigation had been mishandled from the start and that critical evidence was either contaminated or lost. The jury was presented with 2 competing narratives, each relying heavily on interpretation rather than definitive physical proof. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict by a majority decision. Jeremy Bamber was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The judge, while acknowledging investigative failures, stated that the severity of the acts required the strongest possible sentence. In the years that followed, Jeremy repeatedly maintained his innocence, filing multiple appeals and requesting reviews of his case. These efforts led to renewed scrutiny, but ultimately failed to overturn the conviction. Over time, the case became one of the most analyzed in British legal history, Critics point to early police errors, especially the premature clearing of the crime scene, while supporters of the verdict emphasize witness testimony and the weapon evidence. In 2001, the Criminal Cases Review Commission referred the case back to the Court of Appeal, but the conviction was upheld once again. Subsequent submissions were also rejected, reinforcing the original judgment. Today, Jeremy Bamber remains incarcerated, continuing to assert that he was wrongly convicted. His case is frequently cited in discussions about investigative standards, media influence, and the treatment of mental health in criminal proceedings. It also raises difficult questions about how truth is determined when physical evidence is incomplete and narratives conflict. Case 2. Beverly Gail Allett. On the surface, hospitals are places of safety, trust, and healing, especially when it comes to children. Parents leave their most precious loved ones in the care of medical professionals, believing they will be protected at all costs. But in early 1991, inside a small children's ward in Lincolnshire, England, that trust was quietly and repeatedly violated. This is the disturbing case of Beverly Allett, a nurse whose presence was linked to an unprecedented series of medical emergencies involving young patients. On the children's ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, staffing shortages were common, and nurses were often overworked. Beverly Allett was employed there as a state-enrolled nurse and frequently volunteered for extra shifts, especially night duty. She appeared attentive, calm, and reassuring, often comforting anxious parents and presenting herself as deeply committed to her work. No one could have imagined that behind this caring image, something was profoundly wrong. On February 21, 1991, 7-month-old Liam Taylor was admitted with a chest infection. His condition was not considered life-threatening, and his parents were reassured that he would recover. During the night, Liam experienced a sudden breathing crisis. Medical staff intervened, but he suffered severe complications and later passed away after life support was withdrawn. His death was officially attributed to natural medical causes, though some staff quietly questioned why monitoring systems had failed to alert them in time. On March 5, 1991, just 2 weeks later, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick was admitted after an epileptic episode. He had cerebral palsy, but his condition was stable. While under Allett's supervision, Timothy experienced a sudden and fatal collapse. Emergency measures were unsuccessful, and no clear explanation was found during post-incident examination. His passing was attributed to his existing condition, and again, no further action was taken. On March 8th, 1-year-old Kaylee Desmond was recovering well from a chest infection when she suddenly suffered a cardiac emergency. She was successfully stabilized and transferred to another hospital. Doctors later noticed an unusual puncture mark and signs that suggested an abnormal medical event, but these findings were dismissed as accidental. The incident was recorded and quietly filed away. On March 20th, 5-month-old Paul Crampton was admitted with a mild respiratory illness. Shortly before discharge, he became critically unwell multiple times, with tests showing irregular insulin levels that could not be medically explained. Each episode occurred during periods when Allett was responsible for his care. Paul survived after being transferred to another hospital, but no formal link was made between the incidents. On March 21st, 5-year-old Bradley Gibson experienced 2 sudden cardiac emergencies within hours of each other. Blood tests again revealed abnormal insulin levels. He survived after transfer to another facility. That same day, 2-year-old Yik Hung Chan suffered severe oxygen drops while under observation, yet recovered after receiving treatment elsewhere. Each case was treated individually without recognizing the growing pattern. On April 1st, 2-month-old Becky Phillips was admitted with a stomach illness. After showing concerning symptoms, she was examined and discharged when no clear cause was found. Later that night, she suffered a sudden medical collapse at home and passed away. Her twin sister Katie was admitted as a precaution. While under Allett's care, Katie experienced multiple breathing episodes that caused permanent neurological damage. Tragically, her parents expressed gratitude toward Allett, unaware of the role she had played. On April 22, 1991, the final and most critical incident occurred. 15-month-old Claire Peck was admitted following a severe asthma attack and placed on assisted breathing support. While briefly left alone with Allett, Claire experienced a sudden cardiac emergency. She was revived, stabilized, and then once again left in Allet's care. Moments later, she collapsed a second time and did not survive. This incident finally triggered serious concern among hospital staff. On reviewing ward records, medical professionals noticed an alarming trend. A high number of unexplained medical emergencies had occurred over a short period, all involving children who were not expected to deteriorate. More disturbingly, Beverly Allet was present during every single incident. When she was not on duty, the emergency stopped entirely. On police involvement, a full investigation was launched. Medical records revealed abnormal levels of insulin and potassium in multiple patients, substances that should not have been present in such quantities. Missing logs, inconsistent documentation, and unexplained access to medications raised further suspicion. Surveillance was introduced, and staffing patterns were closely examined. On November 1991, Beverly Allet was arrested and charged. During questioning, she denied all allegations and maintained that she had acted only in the children's best interests. Psychological assessments later suggested she suffered from factitious disorder by proxy, a condition involving attention-seeking behavior through the illness or harm of others under one's care. On February 1993, Allet stood trial at Nottingham Crown Court. Prosecutors demonstrated that the medical crises followed her presence with striking consistency. Expert witnesses explained how the abnormal test results could not be attributed to natural illness or treatment errors. The defense argued mental illness, but the evidence proved overwhelming. On May 23, 1993, Beverly Allet was found guilty of multiple counts involving the deaths and serious harm of children. She was sentenced to 13 concurrent life terms and transferred to a high-security medical facility. The judge stated that she posed a lasting danger and was unlikely ever to be safely released. On reflection, this case permanently altered hospital safety procedures across the UK. Medication access, staff monitoring, and incident reporting systems were reformed to prevent similar tragedies. Families were left with irreversible loss, and the nursing profession faced deep public scrutiny. On a broader level, the case of Beverly Allet serves as a chilling reminder that danger does not always come from the shadows. Sometimes it wears a uniform, offers comfort, and earns trust. And when that trust is broken, the consequences can echo for generations. On that children's ward in 1991, the unthinkable happened not once, but repeatedly. Remembering these events is not about fear, but about awareness, accountability, and ensuring that such a breach of trust is never allowed to happen again. Case 3. Robert Bain. On the evening of May 22, 2010, a quiet community in Scotland would become the center of a case that shocked the nation and left a family searching for answers. This is the story of Robert Bain, a young man whose actions led to one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in North Lanarkshire, and of 17-year-old Zoe Nelson, whose life ended far too soon. Zoe lived in Newmains, on the eastern edge of Wishaw, with her mother, stepfather, and younger sister. She was studying motor vehicle repair at college and was described by those who knew her as popular, social, and full of plans for the future. Like many teenagers, her life was complicated by relationships, emotions, and rivalry, particularly involving a local man named Robert Bain, known to friends as Rab. Both Zoe and her younger sister Laura Ann were involved with Bain, a situation that created growing tension inside the Nelson household. On the afternoon of May 22nd, an argument broke out outside their home. Voices were raised, emotions flared, and the disagreement escalated into a physical scuffle between the sisters. Their mother intervened and ordered Zoe to leave the house to cool down. Those words would become heartbreakingly final. Zoe walked away with Bain at around 5 p.m., and that was the last time her family saw her alive. Over the next day, concern slowly turned into fear. Zoe did not return home, and no one could explain where she had gone. Then on the afternoon of May 23rd, an off-road motorcyclist riding through woodland, near an area locally known as Monkey Hill, noticed something unusual on the ground. At first, he thought it was a damaged mannequin. As he got closer, he realized it was a human body, badly affected by fire. He immediately contacted the police. Officers arrived at the scene and quickly understood the seriousness of what they were facing. The remains were found on a makeshift fire site, partially covered by melted plastic material. Because of the extensive damage, investigators knew that identifying the victim and determining what had happened would be extremely difficult. The discovery sent shockwaves through the local community, and a major investigation was launched. A post-event examination was carried out, but specialists explained to the court that their findings were limited due to the condition of the remains. While the exact cause of death could not be officially determined, experts stated that restricted breathing or pressure to the neck was the most likely explanation. The official record would later list the cause as unascertained, a detail that would become central to future legal arguments. As officers began retracing Zoe's final hours, they made an unusual decision. Understanding that many potential witnesses were teenagers who might be reluctant to speak directly to police, investigators used social media and text messaging for the first time in a Scottish serious crime inquiry. Appeals were made online, asking anyone with information to come forward anonymously if necessary. CCTV footage played a crucial role. Cameras captured Zoe inside a local shop at 5:30 p.m. on May 22nd, and shortly after, she was seen walking toward the Cambus-Neathan area with a shirtless man who matched Bain's appearance. Multiple witnesses later reported seeing the pair together. Several described the man as intoxicated, agitated, and aggressive, while Zoe appeared uncomfortable and distressed. One witness even recalled hearing the man make alarming statements, suggesting he intended to seriously harm someone that night. Physical evidence collected near the scene included a tequila bottle and its distinctive red cap. Forensic testing revealed DNA from both Zoe and Bain on these items. Specialists testified that the statistical likelihood of the DNA belonging to anyone else was extremely low. This evidence directly linked Bain to the location where Zoe was found. Despite this, Bain attempted to deflect suspicion. On May 28th, he walked into a police incident unit and claimed that another man had admitted responsibility for Zoe's death. Officers quickly recognized inconsistencies in his story and detained him for questioning. During interviews, Bain insisted he had last seen Zoe earlier that day and claimed he spent the remainder of the evening at home. As the investigation continued, another troubling detail emerged. Zoe's sister, Laura Ann, eventually told police that Bain had taken her to Monkey Hill the morning after Zoe disappeared and showed her the remains. Terrified and confused, she had kept this information to herself for several days, later explaining that she feared no one would believe her and worried she would be blamed. Her testimony would become one of the most emotionally complex elements of the case. In March 2011, the case went to trial at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline, forensic findings, witness statements, and DNA evidence. Bain chose not to testify in his own defense. After 15 days of proceedings, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts on charges of causing Zoe's death and attempting to obstruct justice. When the verdicts were read, Bain reacted violently in the courtroom, shouting threats and needing to be restrained. The judge ordered the courtroom cleared. 1 month later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years before eligibility for parole. Appeals followed, with Bain's legal team arguing that the unclear cause of death made the conviction unsafe and that the sentence was excessive. Both appeals were rejected. The court ruled that the totality of the evidence clearly established responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. In the aftermath, it was revealed that Bain had a long history of previous convictions and had been released from custody only weeks before Zoe disappeared. Police officials stated that the case demonstrated the importance of community cooperation and modern investigative methods. Zoe's family described the verdict as a small measure of closure, though nothing could truly compensate for their loss. Case 4. Joanna Dennehy. On the outskirts of quiet English towns, some stories unfold so slowly that no one notices the danger until it is far too late. In March 2013, a series of discoveries around the city of Peterborough would reveal one of the most unsettling criminal cases in modern British history. This is the story of Joanna Dennehy, a woman whose actions shocked an entire nation and left investigators searching for answers she never truly gave. At first glance, nothing about the early reports suggested a connected pattern. Rural ditches, quiet roads, and isolated locations became the final resting places of 3 men, all discovered within days of each other. Authorities quickly realized these were not unrelated incidents. Each case shared the same disturbing similarities, pointing toward a single individual operating without clear motive and without remorse. Joanna Dennehy was born in 1982 and grew up with opportunities many believed would lead to a stable future. Those who knew her in her teenage years described someone intelligent and outspoken, with ambitions that once included studying law. But as time passed, her life took a darker turn, marked by instability, substance misuse, and increasingly aggressive behavior. Relationships around her became strained, volatile, and in some cases deeply damaging. By the late 2000s, Dennehy's personal life was in disarray. Former partners later described a pattern of emotional volatility, sudden disappearances, and escalating confrontations. Friends and neighbors recalled frequent disturbances and a reputation that made people uneasy. Yet even with these warning signs, no one could have predicted what would happen in the spring of 2013. The first known victim was Kevin Lee, a 48-year-old property developer who rented a home to Dennehy. In late March, after serving an eviction notice related to planned renovations, he vanished. The following day, his body was discovered near Newbro, prompting an immediate police response. What initially appeared to be an isolated tragedy soon became something far more alarming. As investigators expanded their search, two more names emerged: Łukasz Slabashevsky, age 31, and John Chapman, age 56. Both men shared a residence with Dennehy and were last seen within the same narrow time frame. Their bodies were found days later near Thorney, confirming fears that a series of targeted attacks had taken place. The discoveries sent shockwaves through the community. Residents struggled to understand how such events could unfold unnoticed. Police launched a nationwide manhunt, releasing descriptions and urging the public to remain vigilant. Dennehy's appearance, including a distinctive facial tattoo, made her recognizable, and sightings soon began to surface across different regions. The situation escalated rapidly when two additional men were injured in separate daylight incidents in Herefordshire. Though they survived, these events intensified the urgency of the search and raised fears that the danger was ongoing. Authorities moved quickly, coordinating across multiple jurisdictions to locate those responsible before more harm could occur. On April 2, 2013, Dennehy was arrested along with her partner, ending the immediate threat to the public. What followed, however, raised even more questions. During interviews and later court proceedings, Dennehy refused to explain her actions or provide any clear reasoning. Unlike many offenders who attempt justification, she offered none, leaving psychologists and investigators unable to determine a definitive motive. In November 2013, Dennehy appeared at the Old Bailey. To the surprise of the court, she entered guilty pleas to all 3 counts of murder, as well as 2 counts of attempted murder. The decision reportedly shocked even her own legal team. She showed no hesitation and resisted attempts to delay the proceedings, stating firmly that her decision would not change. The courtroom atmosphere was tense as details of the case were formally presented. Families of the victims listened as timelines were reconstructed and evidence summarized. Dennehy remained largely expressionless, offering no words of regret or explanation. For many observers, her silence was as chilling as the crimes themselves. Behind the headlines, another story quietly unfolded: the impact on Dennehy's children. Her former partner later spoke publicly about the fear and confusion they faced, particularly her eldest daughter, who worried that violence might somehow be inherited. Mental health professionals emphasized that such fears were unfounded, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Experts examining the case noted that Dennehy did not fit neatly into existing criminal profiles. While her history included instability and prior offenses, there was no single event that clearly triggered the violence. This lack of clarity has made the case a frequent subject of discussion among criminologists studying motivation and risk factors. Ultimately, Joanna Dennehy was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court determining she would never be released. The ruling reflected not only the severity of her actions, but also the assessment that she posed an ongoing danger. For the families affected, the sentence offered a measure of finality, though it could never undo the loss they suffered. Case 5. William Frederick Ian Beggs. On a cold winter night in Scotland, a young man failed to come home, and within days a case unfolded that would shock the country and expose serious flaws in the justice system. This is the story of William Frederick Ian Beggs, a man whose history of violence raised urgent questions about missed warning signs, overturned convictions, and how close authorities came to stopping a repeat offender before it was too late. What follows is a carefully documented account based on court records and verified reporting, told to inform, not sensationalize, and to live an unremarkable life. He was to live an unremarkable life. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and at times presented himself as an academic, even working as a computer consultant and pursuing advanced studies. But beneath that exterior was a pattern of behavior that would later be described by investigators as deeply concerning. Long before his name became known across the UK, Beggs had already come to the attention of police for serious acts of violence. In 1987, Beggs was convicted of the killing of 28-year-old Barry Oldham, a barman he had met during a night out in England. Prosecutors argued that the incident took place in Beggs' flat after an encounter that turned fatal. He was sentenced to life in prison, and at that time, investigators believed they had prevented a dangerous individual from harming anyone else. However, in a decision that would haunt many involved in the case, that conviction was later overturned on appeal due to procedural errors related to evidence presented at trial. Beggs was released after serving less than 2 years. Following his release, Beggs did not disappear from police radar. In the early 1990s, he was again imprisoned after a violent knife-related attack on another man, an incident that only narrowly avoided a fatal outcome. Despite this, he was released early in 1994 for good behavior. He later moved to Scotland and settled in the town of Kilmarnock, where he attempted to rebuild his life. To those around him, he appeared quiet and intelligent, but behind closed doors, multiple individuals would later report frightening encounters that never resulted in formal charges. Everything changed in December 1999. 18-year-old Barry Wallace went out for a work celebration and was last seen alive that evening. When he did not return home, concern quickly turned into a missing person investigation. Within days, a grim discovery was made in Loch Lomond, where search teams located human remains during a training exercise. Additional discoveries followed, confirming that Barry Wallace had been the victim of a deliberate and calculated act. Investigators soon connected the evidence to Beggs. It was established that Wallace had been picked up in Kilmarnock and taken back to Beggs's flat. What happened inside that apartment would later be described in court as a series of controlled actions carried out after Wallace had been restrained. Following the incident, Beggs attempted to conceal his involvement by disposing of remains in multiple locations, a detail that would become central to the prosecution's case. As the investigation intensified, Beggs fled the country. In a move that surprised many, he later walked into a police station in Amsterdam, accompanied by a lawyer. After a lengthy legal process involving extradition hearings and appeals, Beggs was returned to Scotland to stand trial. The case drew national attention, with extensive media coverage examining both the crime itself and Beggs' troubling past. In September 2001, Beggs went on trial at the High Court in Edinburgh. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline, forensic findings, and testimony that painted a clear picture of events. The jury also learned about Beggs' previous convictions and their earlier overturned murder case, though these details were handled carefully within legal limits to ensure a fair trial. On October 12, 2001, Beggs was found guilty of the killing of Barry Wallace. The court ruled that the act was intentional and aggravated by efforts to conceal evidence afterward. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 20 years before parole eligibility. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the offense in Beggs' long history of violent behavior, stating that public protection was a key factor in sentencing. Following the verdict, law enforcement officials spoke openly about their belief that Beggs showed patterns consistent with escalating violence. One retired senior detective stated that investigators had once feared Beggs was a serial offender in the making and expressed shock that the earlier conviction had been overturned. For many, the case became a painful example of how technical legal decisions can have far-reaching consequences. The impact on Barry Wallace's family and community was profound. Friends and colleagues described him as hardworking and kind, with his family maintaining dignity throughout the lengthy court process. Their loss became a reminder that behind every headline is a real person whose life was abruptly and unfairly cut short. In later years, Beggs attempted to appeal his conviction, arguing that media coverage had affected the fairness of his trial. These efforts were unsuccessful, and courts ruled that the evidence against him was overwhelming. He remains incarcerated, with little indication that he will ever be released. Case 6. Fiona Donison. On the morning of January 27, 2010, a quiet police station in Heathfield became the center of one of the most disturbing family tragedies in modern British criminal history. A woman walked in, visibly shaken, speaking in a flat, emotionless tone. She calmly told officers that she had ended the lives of her own children and had come to surrender herself. At first, officers believed she was under the influence or in shock, but what they soon discovered would leave an entire nation struggling to understand how such a thing could happen. That woman was Fiona Donison, a 45-year-old former insurance manager. Her victims were her two youngest children, Harry, age 3, and Elise, just 2 years old. What followed was a case defined not by sudden chaos, but by calculated decisions driven by jealousy, control, and a desire for emotional retaliation. Fiona Donison's life on the surface appeared stable. She was intelligent, well-educated, and had built a successful career in the financial sector. She had been in a long-term relationship with Paul Donison, though the couple never married. Together they had 3 children over the years. But beneath that appearance of normalcy, investigators would later uncover a relationship marked by manipulation, intense jealousy, and emotional instability. The relationship began to unravel in 2009. Fiona lost her job, an event that reportedly dealt a serious blow to her sense of self-worth. Around the same time, tensions between the couple escalated. Paul described Fiona as increasingly controlling, frequently suspicious, and prone to emotional outbursts. Eventually, the relationship ended when Paul made it clear that he could no longer continue under those conditions. What Fiona could not accept was the loss of control. Matters escalated further when she learned that Paul had reconnected with an old school friend and had begun a new romantic relationship. According to court testimony, Fiona perceived this not only as rejection, but as humiliation. Witnesses later described how she issued warnings, made threats, and insisted that Paul would never see the children again if the relationship continued. In the days leading up to January 26, 2010, Fiona's behavior became increasingly erratic. She moved the children to a rented property in Surrey, restricted Paul's access to them, and contacted authorities multiple times with accusations that were later disputed. Social services were aware of tensions within the family, but no immediate intervention was made. On the evening of January 26th, Fiona carried out the act that would define the case forever. While the children were asleep, she used pillows to prevent them from breathing. Investigators later emphasized that the children showed no signs of struggle, suggesting they were unaware of what was happening. Afterwards, she carefully placed each child into separate sports bags and loaded them into the trunk of her car. Instead of immediately contacting authorities, Fiona drove nearly 90 miles back to East Sussex. During the journey, she stopped to purchase sleeping tablets and carried kitchen knives in the vehicle. Prosecutors would later argue that this suggested she was contemplating further actions, though no additional harm occurred. When she realized Paul was not at the family home, she waited for several hours before finally entering the police station to confess. Officers directed her back to her vehicle, where they made the devastating discovery. Harry and Elise were beyond help. The case sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom, not only because of the nature of the crime, but because Fiona had voluntarily turned herself in and openly admitted responsibility. As the investigation unfolded, authorities re-examined the earlier passing of the couple's first child, Mia, who had died years earlier as an infant. At the time, her passing had been attributed to sudden infant causes. Following the 2010 events, Fiona was briefly charged in connection with that death as well. However, due to insufficient evidence, the charge was later dismissed, and the jury in the trial concerning Harry and Elise was never informed of it. During the trial at Lewis Crown Court, prosecutors presented the case as one driven by emotional retaliation. They argued that Fiona viewed her children as leverage, using them as a final means to hurt their father. Expert witnesses described her as having narcissistic personality traits, including an inflated sense of entitlement and a deep fear of abandonment. The defense claimed Fiona was mentally unwell at the time and unable to fully comprehend her actions. However, the jury ultimately rejected this argument. The careful planning, the sequence of events, and her actions afterward led them to conclude that she was aware of what she was doing. In August 2011, Fiona Donison was found guilty on 2 counts and sentenced to 2 life terms, with a minimum of 32 years before eligibility for release. The judge described the acts as deliberate and morally indefensible, emphasizing that the victims were entirely defenseless and trusted the person who was meant to protect them most. Paul Donison later spoke publicly about the loss, describing Harry and Elise as the brightest lights in his life. His statements reflected not only grief, but disbelief that someone he once loved could cause such irreversible harm. Friends, teachers, and caregivers described the children as affectionate, gentle, and full of promise. Case 7. Levi Belfield. On a quiet evening in West London, ordinary routines were unfolding as they always had. Buses arriving, people heading home, streets dimly lit and familiar. But hidden within this sense of normal life was a pattern of danger few could have imagined. This is the story of Levi Belfield, a man whose outward confidence masked a series of calculated attacks that would change several families forever and leave lasting scars on a community. Belfield was born on May 17, 1968, in Isleworth, West London. Raised on a council estate, his childhood was shaped by instability and loss. His father passed away suddenly when Levi was still young, leaving a household that struggled both emotionally and financially. Friends and later investigators would note that Belfield learned early how to project charm and confidence, traits that later allowed him to blend easily into everyday life. By adulthood, he had worked as a nightclub bouncer and later ran a wheel clamping business, giving him reason to spend long hours driving through areas he knew intimately. Despite appearing sociable, Belfield had a long record of criminal behavior before the most serious events ever came to light. From burglary to assault and repeated driving offenses, his interactions with the justice system escalated over time. Former partners later described a repeating pattern in his personal relationships. At first, he was attentive and engaging, but gradually became controlling and intimidating, isolating them from friends and family. Investigators would later recognize these behaviors as early warning signs of a much darker pattern. Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton of the Metropolitan Police described Belfield as someone who could instantly shift personalities. In conversation, he might appear friendly and humorous, but this could quickly turn into hostility. According to police, Belfield's sense of entitlement played a major role in his actions. He often reacted aggressively when he felt ignored or rejected, especially by young women he encountered while driving or near public transport routes. The first fatal case officially linked to Belfield involved Marcia McDonnell. In February 2003, the 19-year-old had returned from an evening out and stepped off a bus near her home in Hampton. Just yards from her front door, she was assaulted and suffered severe head injuries. She later passed away in hospital. The sudden loss devastated her family and shocked the local community, who believed the area to be safe. At the time, there were few leads, and the case remained unresolved for months. In May 2004, another young woman narrowly survived a serious attack. Kate Sheedy, then 18, was crossing a road near an industrial estate when a vehicle struck her. She sustained multiple injuries and required weeks of medical care. Her survival would later become crucial as she was able to give evidence describing the incident, helping investigators connect patterns between cases. Just 3 months later, tragedy struck again. Amélie Delagrange, a 22-year-old student from France, was living in Twickenham while improving her English. One evening in August 2004, after missing her bus stop, she walked through Twickenham Green. CCTV footage showed her slowing her pace shortly before the attack. She was later found with catastrophic injuries and died the same night. Within hours, detectives began to suspect that the same individual was responsible for both her death and the earlier case involving Marcia McDonnell. As the investigation widened, police reviewed Belfield's movements and noticed how frequently he drove through the same neighborhoods where the attacks occurred. Witnesses reported seeing him talking to young women near bus stops, and former partners described his fixation on a specific type. Though Belfield denied all involvement, surveillance and forensic evidence gradually tightened around him. In November 2004, he was arrested, marking a turning point in the investigation. During questioning and later court proceedings, Belfield maintained his innocence. However, prosecutors presented a detailed timeline, vehicle records, witness accounts, and behavioral evidence that painted a consistent picture. In February 2008, a jury found Belfield guilty of the fatal attacks on Marcia McDonnell and Amélie Delagrange, as well as the attempted killing of Kate Sheedy. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. Even after the conviction, questions remained. Investigators publicly stated that they believed Belfield could be linked to other unresolved cases. One of the most significant was the disappearance and death of Amanda Dowler, a 13-year-old who went missing in 2002. Years later, further evidence led to Belfield being charged and convicted in connection with her case as well, reinforcing fears that the full scope of his actions might never be completely known. For the families of the victims, the court verdicts brought a measure of justice but not closure. Parents, siblings, and friends spoke of lives permanently altered, of milestones that would never be reached. Memorials were placed in the communities where the young women had lived, turning sites of tragedy into places of remembrance. Case 8. Nicola Caroline Edgington. On a quiet morning in England, a chain of events unfolded that would later be described as one of the most preventable tragedies in modern British true crime. This story is not just about violence, but about warning signs, missed chances, and a system that struggled to respond in time. At the center of it all is Nicola Edgington, a woman whose life was shaped by instability, untreated illness, and repeated cries for help that went unanswered, with consequences that would change several families forever. Nicola Edgington was born in 1980 in England and grew up in a deeply troubled household. From an early age, her life was marked by chaos, conflict, and emotional distress. She later told authorities that she had experienced abuse during childhood, and records show she displayed aggressive behavior toward family members while still young. As a teenager, she struggled with authority, engaged in theft, and frequently clashed with those closest to her. These early patterns were not isolated incidents, but warning signs of deeper issues that would follow her into adulthood. As Nicola grew older, her life became increasingly unstable. She moved in and out of care homes and held short-term jobs as a hairdresser, shop assistant, and sales worker. But nothing lasted. Her personal relationships were volatile, often involving controlling or violent partners. At 17, she suffered the loss of an early pregnancy after an assault by a boyfriend, an event that deeply affected her mental state. Later, she gave birth to a son prematurely, but due to concerns about her ability to provide care, the child was placed into foster care with the involvement of her mother, Marion. That decision would later become a source of deep resentment. Marion Edgington, Nicola's mother, was described by others as supportive but fearful. She continued to help her daughter despite growing concerns for her own safety. In November 2005, during a visit to Marion's home in East Sussex, tensions reached a breaking point. What happened inside that house would permanently alter the course of Nicola's life and mark the first confirmed loss connected to her actions. Marion was found with multiple injuries, and Nicola later admitted responsibility while claiming she was not fully aware of her actions at the time. In court, medical experts testified that Nicola was experiencing severe mental disturbance. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia along with emotionally unstable personality traits. In October 2006, she was found guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility rather than intentional wrongdoing. Instead of prison, she was detained indefinitely under mental health legislation and placed in a secure psychiatric facility. At the time, the decision was seen as appropriate and protective, both for Nicola and the public. After several years of treatment, evaluations concluded that Nicola's condition had improved. In 2009, she was conditionally released into the community and placed in a monitored flat in Greenwich, London. She was assigned a psychiatrist, a social supervisor, and a community mental health nurse. On paper, safeguards were in place. In reality, cracks soon appeared. Nicola struggled to maintain medication, her emotional state declined, and her sense of isolation deepened. By September 2011, Nicola was clearly deteriorating. She reached out to her brother through social media, expressing grief over her mother's death and distress over another pregnancy loss. The response she received was harsh and devastating, reminding her of her past actions in the most brutal way possible. From that moment, her mental state spiraled rapidly. She began contacting emergency services repeatedly, reporting that she felt unsafe and feared losing control. In the days leading up to October 10, 2011, Nicola called police and mental health services multiple times. She warned them directly that she had harmed someone in the past and believed she was becoming dangerous again. She asked to be detained for her own safety and the safety of others. Despite the seriousness of these warnings, responses were delayed, downgraded, or dismissed. When she was finally taken to a hospital, she was not securely admitted and was left in a general area despite her documented risk history. Early that morning, Nicola walked out of the hospital through an unsecured door. No alert was issued in time, and no immediate follow-up occurred. What happened next unfolded in a matter of minutes but left permanent damage. After traveling by bus to Bexley Heath, Nicola targeted two strangers in separate incidents. One young woman survived due to quick thinking and intervention from others. The second victim, Sally Hodkin, a 58-year-old grandmother on her way to work, did not survive the encounter. Nicola was arrested later that same morning without resistance. The shock that followed was immediate and widespread. Investigations quickly revealed that authorities had failed to check key records that would have shown her prior conviction. An independent review later confirmed that opportunities to intervene had been missed at multiple stages, from police response to hospital admission decisions. During the trial at the Old Bailey in 2013, jurors heard extensive testimony from psychiatric experts. Some argued Nicola was experiencing active psychosis with delusions and hallucinations, while others believed her actions were driven primarily by severe personality disorder rather than loss of reality. The court ultimately concluded that while mental illness was present, the actions showed planning and awareness. Nicola was convicted of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. Case 9. David Francis Bieber. On the morning after Christmas in 2003, the city of Leeds was quiet, almost still, as most families remained indoors enjoying the final hours of the holiday. Few people could have imagined that within minutes, an ordinary traffic stop would become one of the most significant criminal cases in modern British history, involving a man who had spent years running from his past and crossing international borders to avoid responsibility. This story centers on David Francis Bieber, a former American bodybuilder whose long escape from justice ended in tragedy and permanent imprisonment. Bieber was born on February 3, 1966, in Fort Myers, Florida, into what appeared to be a stable and supportive household. His father worked as a high school principal, and in his early years, Bieber showed discipline and ambition, especially in athletics. He excelled in swimming and later became deeply involved in weight training, building an imposing physical presence that would later become central to both his lifestyle and his criminal reputation. After leaving school, Bieber briefly joined the United States Marine Corps, but military structure did not suit him. He went absent without leave and was eventually discharged, returning to Florida without direction or stable employment. As his dedication to bodybuilding intensified, so did his involvement in underground steroid distribution, a world fueled by competition, money, and personal rivalries. By the mid-1990s, Bieber had surrounded himself with other bodybuilders, including Marcus Muller, a German-born athlete who shared both business interests and personal connections with him. Tensions grew over control of the steroid trade and over relationships, forming a volatile triangle that drew the attention of law enforcement in February 1995, when Muller was found fatally shot inside his Florida home. Bieber was questioned by police, and although suspicion surrounded him, there was not enough evidence at the time to file charges. Shortly after, a second incident occurred when Bieber's former girlfriend was targeted in a late-night attack that she survived without injury. Investigators later linked both incidents to the same hired individual, who claimed he had been paid by associates connected to Bieber. As detectives prepared to build a stronger case, Bieber vanished, disappearing before an arrest could be made. Using a stolen identity, Bieber assumed the name Nathan Wayne Coleman, taken from the records of a deceased child. With this false identity, he obtained a passport and fled the United States in 1996. beginning a new chapter of his life overseas. Bieber entered the United Kingdom through the port of Ramsgate and initially lived without attracting attention. He married a British woman, found work as a nightclub doorman, and settled in northern England. Outwardly, he appeared to be a private but stable individual. Behind the scenes, however, he continued gambling heavily, collecting illegal weapons, and living in constant fear of exposure. His marriage eventually collapsed, and by 2003, his carefully constructed life was beginning to unravel. On December 26, 2003, two traffic officers noticed a vehicle parked suspiciously outside a betting shop in Leeds. A routine check revealed false registration plates, and the driver was asked to sit in the back of a patrol car while details were verified. The officers, sensing unease, requested backup. Moments later, as one officer attempted to apply restraints, Bieber drew a concealed handgun and fired multiple shots in rapid succession. The officers, who were unarmed, attempted to escape. One was struck and seriously injured but survived. Another officer was hit and fell to the ground, unable to move. After a brief pause, Bieber approached and fired a final shot at close range, causing fatal injuries. The third officer narrowly avoided harm when a bullet struck his radio instead. The incident triggered one of the largest manhunts in British policing history. Bieber fled the scene, changed his appearance, dyed his hair, and moved frequently, using cash withdrawals and temporary lodging to avoid detection. Investigators gathered evidence from the patrol car, nearby shops, and surveillance footage, including fingerprints and audio recordings that captured Bieber's voice. Linguistic experts identified the accent as American, narrowing the search dramatically. Within days, tips from the public led police to the name Nathan Wayne Coleman, but further investigation revealed that the identity itself was false. Fingerprints sent to U.S. databases confirmed the truth. The suspect was David Bieber, a fugitive wanted in Florida for serious offenses dating back nearly a decade. Armed police eventually traced Bieber to a hotel in Gateshead on December 31, 2003. Believing he was heavily armed, officers surrounded the building and prepared for a prolonged standoff. After several tense minutes, Bieber opened the door and surrendered without resistance. A loaded handgun and hundreds of rounds of ammunition were found in his room. Bieber was charged with 1 count of fatal shooting and 2 counts of attempted fatal harm to officers. During his trial in 2004, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including eyewitness testimony, forensic analysis, fingerprints, and voice comparisons. Bieber claimed that an unnamed associate was responsible and that he had only been present, a defense the jury rejected unanimously. The court sentenced Bieber to life imprisonment, describing the offense as a direct attack on public safety and the rule of law. The judge noted Bieber's lack of remorse and emphasized that the final shot was unnecessary and deliberate. Initially, a whole life term was imposed, meaning no possibility of release. Although later appeals adjusted the minimum term to 37 years, Bieber is not expected to be considered for parole until at least 2041, when he would be in his mid-70s. Case 10. Sarah Ege. On the quiet streets of Cardiff, Wales, in July 2010, a tragedy unfolded that would shock the community and capture international attention. 7-year-old Yassine Ege, a bright and lively child, would lose his life in circumstances that revealed the dark side of familial pressure and obsession. His mother, Sarah Ege, was later convicted of his murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years. The case raised questions about parental expectations, domestic abuse, and the systems in place to protect children. Yassine's early years were marked by his parents' strong desire for him to become a Hafiz, someone who memorizes the Quran. His mother, Sarah, and father, Yusuf, enrolled him in classes and insisted he study rigorously before and after school. But Yassine, like many children, struggled with these expectations. Teachers noticed signs of distress. Once, Yassine explained that his hand hurt because he had been struck at home. Small indicators like untidy handwriting or a reluctance to play outside hinted at deeper issues, though early interventions failed to prevent the tragedy. Over several months, Yassine endured repeated punishment at home due to his difficulties in keeping up with the demanding study schedule. Neighbors and relatives later described Sarah as a devoted mother, yet her strict methods escalated into dangerous levels of control. On the day of Yasin's death, he stayed home from school to focus on his studies. Despite her intentions, Sarah's frustration turned into an extreme reaction that would prove fatal. Investigations revealed that Yasin suffered severe internal injuries that indicated a prolonged period of mistreatment. Initially, his death was thought to be accidental, but careful investigation uncovered the truth. After Yasin's passing, Sarah attempted to hide the circumstances by setting a fire in the family home. Fire investigators quickly realized that Yasin had died prior to the blaze, leading authorities to consider the events more closely. The post-mortem examination revealed multiple injuries, which painted a tragic picture of ongoing abuse rather than an isolated incident. In court, Sarah admitted to some actions but later retracted statements, complicating the trial and drawing intense media coverage. The legal proceedings were closely followed in Cardiff. Sarah faced charges of murder and perverting the course of justice. Throughout the trial, her defense argued that her husband, Yusuf, had played a role in the events, yet he was ultimately cleared of responsibility. The court examined months of reports, including statements from teachers and local authorities, showing that Yasin's struggles and the family's history of domestic difficulties had been known to professionals. Although interventions had been attempted, they were fragmented and insufficient, highlighting the challenges in coordinated child protection efforts. The judge in the case described Sarah as an otherwise caring mother whose obsessive focus on her son's studies led to devastating consequences. The case revealed how pressure and frustration, when left unchecked, can escalate to irreversible outcomes. Sarah was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years, acknowledging the severity of her actions while also recognizing that she had previously shown devotion in other areas of Yasin's upbringing. Throughout the trial, testimony highlighted Yasin's intelligence and gentle nature. Teachers recalled him as a diligent student who enjoyed creative activities and had a warm, friendly personality. Friends and family described him as a bright child with a promising future. The contrast between his potential and the circumstances of his death made the story all the more poignant, serving as a sobering reminder of the importance of monitoring and supporting vulnerable children. This case also brought attention to systemic challenges in child protection. Reports dating back to 2003 noted instances of domestic tension in the Ege household, yet communication between agencies was inconsistent. Even when further reports emerged in 2007, delays in intervention meant that the family's situation was not fully understood. After Yasin began school, teachers raised concerns, but these were not escalated appropriately under interagency procedures. The tragedy demonstrated gaps in safeguarding systems that authorities have since worked to address through coordinated action plans and revised protocols. Sarah Ege's behavior during the investigation added complexity to the case. She described feelings of being influenced by outside forces and at times claimed she had been coerced into taking responsibility. Psychological assessments indicated long-standing struggles with mental health, which intersected with the family dynamics to create a volatile environment. While these factors were considered during sentencing, they did not excuse the outcome. The court ultimately focused on accountability, ensuring that justice for Yasin was served. The public response to the case was one of shock and sorrow. Community members, educators, and legal professionals reflected on the signs that had been missed and the measures that could have been taken to prevent such a tragedy. Statements from Yasin's father and teachers emphasized the love and care he had received in certain aspects of his life, even amidst the abuse. Their words highlighted the complexity of human relationships and the difficulty in fully understanding domestic situations from the outside. Yasin Ege's death prompted a thorough review by Cardiff's local safeguarding board. Recommendations emphasized the importance of better coordination among child protection services, improved training, and earlier intervention when warning signs arise. These measures aim to prevent future tragedies and underscore the responsibility of communities and institutions to protect children. Lessons learned from this case have influenced policies and practices beyond Cardiff, affecting broader discussions around child welfare and family support. Ultimately, the story of Yasin Ege is a tragic illustration of how high expectations, unresolved parental frustration, and systemic shortcomings can converge with devastating results. It serves as a stark reminder for parents, educators, and authorities alike to recognize and respond to signs of distress in children. While justice was served in court, the broader societal implications remain. Yassine's memory lives on through efforts to safeguard children and educate communities about the consequences of unchecked abuse. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this video interesting or informative, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories. Your support really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you carefully researched cases. Let me know in the comments which case stayed with you the most. See you in the next video.